So what we're going to discuss in this video, which is vital for somebody to be able to fully and permanently overcome their struggles with chronic anxiety, can be somewhat confronting and even triggering for a lot of people. Now, what we're going to be discussing here is not always applicable to everybody who is struggling with chronic anxiety. However, if this is appropriate to you, then it's vital that you have both the courage and the honesty to acknowledge it so that you can overcome it and move to the other side that leads to the emotional freedom that you are after. Because this is not about finger pointing or blame or make wrong. This is about self-awareness that leads to that emotional freedom. So what are we talking about here? Well, in order for somebody to permanently overcome chronic anxiety, they first and foremost need to make a categorical decision to do whatever it takes to achieve that outcome. And secondly, as part of that decision, they need to let go of any reasons that they might still be holding on to for remaining stuck. Now, why would somebody want to remain stuck? Well, the truth is that we can unconsciously become rewarded for holding on to our emotional pain. And I'm going to give you a few examples of this so that you can see if some of these are relevant to you so that you can develop that self-awareness and move through it. So the first example is that when we are in emotional pain, other people treat us differently. And that's obviously coming from a place of caring, from a place of love. But sometimes we can become addicted to the attention and the sense of connection that we feel as a result of being in emotional pain. And sometimes we can allow ourselves to rely on that vehicle, if you like, for receiving the connection that we crave. And we rely on it more and more and more, and eventually it becomes a habit, and eventually, unconsciously, our brain stores that as the most reliable and effective way for achieving that sense of connection. But ultimately, any connection, any love that is coerced out of other people is not healthy and it's not sustainable. Another example is that when we are in emotional pain, other people can sometimes tread on eggshells around us. And so again, we can learn to rely on using our emotional pain as a way of getting other people to do what we want them to do. We can use it to influence, even manipulate, using our emotional pain as leverage. Another example is that when we are in emotional pain, we, yes, feel alone, but at the same time feel special and unique. And that might sound weird to a lot of you, but it's actually surprisingly common for people to feel some kind of unconscious sense of significance by having a significant problem. One of the super common ways that we can become rewarded for holding on to our emotional pain is when we perceive the process of change as being more painful than not changing. The process of overcoming these issues is more painful than continuing to do things the way that we've always done it, because at least this is familiar and predictable. Because the process of change, fully and permanently overcoming chronic anxiety, requires the courage to face your fears, it requires doing hard work, and it requires the commitment to see it through to the end. And so we can, again, unconsciously, we're not doing this on purpose, it's an unconsciously learned response, but we can unconsciously develop protection mechanisms to protect us from having to face our fears, do that work, and make that level of bold, decisive commitment. One of the ways that we do this is we develop an elaborate story, usually a very intensely emotional story about why we're stuck and why it's all useless, so what's the point in even trying anyway? And that often leads us, as part of that story, to play the blame game, to blame events from the past, to blame people in our lives, perhaps parents, for example, or even to blame ourselves. But when you're blaming yourself, you're not taking ownership. When you take ownership, you take responsibility for what's going to happen next and you take bold, decisive action. But when you blame, you say, I'm useless, I'm such a screw up, what's the point in even trying? But in either case, I've now got an elaborate story for how there's no point in even trying. So now I'm protected from having to face my fears, do the work, or make that level of commitment. Limiting beliefs are another way that we can learn that. And this is not always the case with all limiting beliefs. Sometimes limiting beliefs are developed in other ways, which we discussed in the previous video. But sometimes we develop limiting beliefs as a protection mechanism, because now that I believe that I'm stuck this way, there's nothing that I can do about it, again, now I don't have to face my fears, do the work, or make that level of commitment. So the solution to this is to make that categorical decision that you're going to do whatever it takes to overcome this once and for all, and to let go of any of these reasons. If you notice that some of these reasons were hanging around unconsciously, maybe you weren't even aware of it, but now that you have that courage and that honesty to see it for what it really is, you can let it go. And as part of letting it go, it's vital that we forgive ourselves as part of this process. Because like I said, all of these things are learned unconsciously. As you were growing up and going through the events in your life, all you were doing is you were doing your best to survive and your best to meet deep core emotional needs that all of us have that must be met one way or the other. And sometimes we can develop ways for meeting those needs that later on in life are not particularly useful. But at the time, based on your age, based on your life circumstances, and based on what we call your model of the world, which is your understanding of yourself, how the world works, your understanding of the options that you have available, or your perceived capabilities, or your understanding of other people. All of these things make up your model of the world. Based on your model of the world, that response was the best option you had available. Probably the only option that you had available for meeting those emotional needs. So we need to be kind to ourselves and forgive ourselves and genuinely love and accept our former selves, because again, it's not your fault, you're not to blame, you were doing the best you could. But now that we have this level of self-awareness, now we can see what was really going on at the unconscious level, take what was unconscious, make it conscious, acknowledge it, have the courage and the honesty to acknowledge it, so that we can let it go and move forwards and make a new decision. So part of this process is making a categorical decision to become a bold, decisive action taker and do whatever it takes to overcome these issues once and for all. And as part of that, recognize that making no decision is still a decision. And when you do that, when you make no decision and you put it off, you build the habit of procrastinating. You build the habit of avoiding scary decisions. That then becomes a standard that you tolerate from yourself. But what that means is that you're no longer a leader in your life, you're now a passenger. And you're more and more likely to feel like a victim of circumstance. So make that categorical decision to do whatever it takes, become that bold, decisive action taker, and that is a choice, so that you can move to the other side, you can move through this, you can let go of all of these reasons, and you can experience the emotional freedom finally at the end of that process that you deserve and that you are after.